The Galactic Council had always known about the humans. Ever since they first stumbled onto the interstellar stage, they had been the subject of heated debate, hushed warnings, and most of all, fear. They came from a world classified as a death world, a planet so hostile, so chaotic that no other species would have survived its evolutionary crucible. They had evolved among relentless predators, on lands ravaged by disasters, under skies that hurled storms and fire, and yet they had thrived. To the Council, they were an anomaly, an unpredictable warlike race, whose aggression was only matched by their sheer audacity. Their history was one of endless conflict, of wars fought over land, resources, and even ideology. They didn't just survive hardship, they excelled in it. Their adaptability was terrifying, their technology unconventional, and their refusal to accept defeat, that was what made them dangerous. So the Galactic Council had done what they always did with threats too powerful to face. They had ignored them. They built policies to contain human expansion. They restricted their trade, they denied them access to key alliances, and kept them at the edges of galactic politics. They told themselves that as long as humanity was kept at arm's length, their influence would remain contained. But now, as the Zeltar Dominion carved a bloody path across the stars, the Council realized their mistake. The Zelthar were not like any enemy they had ever faced. They were a nightmare born from the depths of some forgotten horror, a hive mind of biomechanical monstrosities. Their ships moved with eerie coordination, their soldiers fought without fear or hesitation, and their weapons rendered even the most advanced shielding useless. Entire fleets had fallen in days. Planets were consumed in hours. Civilizations that had stood for millennia were now nothing more than hollowed-out husks, stripped of life, their people assimilated or incinerated. The war had been swift, brutal, and utterly one-sided. The Council had thrown everything they had at the Zeltar, and everything had failed. Velsara Prime was the last stronghold standing between the Dominion and the core worlds. If it fell, the heart of the galaxy would follow. And so, with no other options left, the Council did the one thing they had sworn never to do. They sent a desperate plea for help to the humans. The United Terran Coalition had watched from the shadows as the war unfolded. They had not intervened, not at first. The Council had made it clear for years that humans were not welcome in galactic affairs. Now, as the last of the so-called civilized races faced extinction, humanity had every reason to let them burn. And yet, they answered. When the first human warships arrived in the Velsar system, the Council's fleets were barely holding the line. What was once a proud defense force had been reduced to battered, broken vessels, their crews exhausted, their weapons failing. Then, the Terrans entered the fray. They came in formation. Sleek, black-hulled warships bristling with kinetic weaponry and missile batteries. Unlike the Council, who had relied on energy weapons and shield-based defense, humanity had taken a different approach to war. Their ships were built to endure damage, not avoid it. Their armor was reinforced with exotic alloys and reactive plating, able to absorb and redistribute impacts. Instead of plasma-based weaponry, they fired massive slugs of tungsten and depleted uranium, accelerating them to relativistic speeds with railguns. And then there were the nuclear warheads. No other species in the galaxy used nuclear weapons in space combat. Energy shields rendered them useless against most ships, and the radiation they produced was considered abhorrent by the Council's war doctrines. The humans, however, had perfected their use. Their missiles didn't just explode, they created kill zones, tearing through the Zelthar swarms like a scythe through wheat. The Council watched in stunned silence as the battle changed in minutes. The Zeltar had never encountered warfare like this. Their ships, optimized to fight energy-based fleets, were utterly unprepared for the brutal kinetic onslaught. Their chitinous hulls shattered under the impact of hypervelocity rounds. Their intricate coordination broke as nuclear detonations disrupted their formations. And then came the ground war. When the Zeltar landed on planets, they conquered them. They did not engage in prolonged battles. They did not expect resistance to last more than hours. They overwhelmed. They assimilated. They moved on. They had never faced humans. The Terran ground forces deployed in full force, heavy drop pods slamming into the surface, unleashing squads of armored soldiers equipped with rail rifles, plasma casters, and drones, designed to turn any environment into a killing field. The Zeltar, for the first time in their existence, struggled. Human soldiers fought like no other species. They did not retreat when overwhelmed. They adapted. They counterattacked. They used asymmetric tactics that the hive mind could not predict. Ambushes, flanking maneuvers, hit-and-run strikes that left entire Zeltar battalions in ruin. And then there were the human commanders. No other species fought like them. Where the Council relied on rigid, calculated strategies, humans were chaotic, unpredictable, and terrifyingly brilliant. They used feints, misinformation, psychological warfare, things the Zeltar had never accounted for. In the Council's war chambers, the alien representatives watched in awe. They had never seen a war fought like this. They had never imagined it was even possible. Admiral Helena Drake stood aboard the bridge of the UTS Behemoth, watching the battle unfold. She had led human forces in countless skirmishes across the outer systems, had fought in conflicts where the odds were stacked against her. But this was something else entirely. She opened a channel to the Council's command station. "This is Admiral Drake of the United Terran Coalition," she said, her voice calm despite the chaos unfolding across the system. "I suggest you stand back and watch how Deathworlders handle extinction events." And then she gave the order. The final push began. Humanity did not fight for honor. They did not fight for pride. They fought to win. As the Zeltar mothership loomed over Velsara Prime, a dozen Terran warships launched coordinated strikes, targeting its structural weak points. Tactical nuclear warheads detonated deep inside its biomechanical hull, sending shockwaves through the entire vessel. The hive mind screamed in agony. For the first time, the Zeltar retreated. In the history of the galaxy, no species had ever forced them back. No one had ever won against them. But now, as the remnants of the Dominion fleet fled into deep space, it became clear. The humans had done the impossible. As the dust settled, the Council representatives stood in silence, struggling to process what had just happened. Their greatest fleets had been annihilated in days. Their strongest defenses had crumbled in hours, and yet the humans had succeeded where they had failed. And then came the most terrifying part. The humans did not celebrate. They did not demand tribute, nor did they gloat. They simply looked at the Council with cold, unreadable expressions. Admiral Drake's final words echoed through the chambers, her voice devoid of triumph or arrogance. Just a simple, undeniable truth. "This war isn't over. We gave you a chance. Next time, don't wait until you're at the brink of extinction to call us." And just like that, the Deathworlders turned and left, their fleet vanishing into the void. The Council, for the first time in its long history, stood in absolute silence. They had feared humanity for so long, and now they finally understood why. The silence in the Galactic Council's war chambers was suffocating. Representatives from 100 species sat in stunned disbelief, their minds struggling to process what had just happened. Across the holographic displays, remnants of the battle still flickered. Zelfar ships breaking apart, nuclear detonations flashing like miniature stars, the remains of a once invincible armada, now little more than drifting wreckage. The humans had won. No one had believed it possible. Even as their fleet had arrived in the Velsara system, there had been doubt. Even as their soldiers deployed to the surface, there had been hesitation. Even as their ships carved through the Zeltar swarms, there had been denial. The idea that a single species, one deliberately kept at the fringes of power, could succeed where entire civilizations had failed was unthinkable. And yet there it was. The surviving Council admirals and generals, those who had commanded the last desperate defense of Velsara Prime, remained fixated on the battle reports. Every data stream told the same story. Humanity had not just survived the Zeltar assault, they had dismantled it. Methodically, brutally, completely. The door to the chambers slid open with a quiet hiss, drawing all eyes to the woman who entered. Admiral Helena Drake. She walked in without ceremony, her expression unreadable. The humans had been summoned for a debriefing, an official recognition of their role in the battle. And yet, the moment she stepped into the chamber, an unspoken tension filled the air. It was not just the weight of gratitude, it was fear. Drake took a single look around the room, her sharp green eyes assessing each and every one of them. Then, without preamble, she spoke. "Let's make one thing clear," she said, her voice steady. "We didn't do this for you." Murmurs rippled through the chamber, but no one dared interrupt. "You think this was a rescue mission, a humanitarian effort?" Drake's lip curled in something that wasn't quite a smile. "No, we fought because the alternative was unacceptable, because if the Zeltar had taken Velsara Prime, the war would have reached us next. And we don't wait for war to come to us." She stepped forward, placing both hands on the polished obsidian table at the center of the room. "We came because we knew you wouldn't last. Because we knew that when the moment came, you'd fold. And we were right." One of the council representatives, a tall, violet-skinned Yelvi diplomat, cleared his throat, his mandibles clicking nervously. "Admiral Drake, while your intervention was unprecedented, I do not believe it is fair to—" Drake's gaze snapped to him, and he immediately fell silent. "You don't believe it's fair?" Her voice was quiet now, almost dangerous. "Let me tell you what isn't fair. My soldiers walking through the ruins of a dozen worlds, watching entire populations wiped out because you were too proud to ask for help sooner. My fleet burning through resources and lives, fighting a war you weren't prepared to fight. That isn't fair." Silence. Drake exhaled, shaking her head. "We sent envoys, before this war started, before the Zeltar even made their first move. We told you the Dominion was a threat. We showed you the signs. And what did you do?" She let the question hang in the air for a moment before answering it herself. "You dismissed us. You ignored our warnings, treated us like warmongers, like some primitive species that didn't understand the nuances of galactic politics." Her fingers drummed against the table. "We did understand. We understood better than you did." A representative from the Zendar Confederacy, a species known for their diplomacy, leaned forward, his large, luminous eyes full of measured concern. "Admiral Drake, surely you must see the position we were in. The Council has long strived to maintain peace." "Peace," Drake cut him off with a bitter laugh. "You call this peace?" She gestured toward the holograms, where the wreckage of 1,000 ships still floated lifeless in the void. "This wasn't peace, this was complacency. You didn't want to believe war was coming, so you buried your heads in the sand and hoped the monsters would go away. But that's not how the universe works." The Zendar representative had no response. Drake sighed, her expression softening, not in kindness, but in exhaustion. "Let me ask you something. Do you think we like being this way?" Her voice was quieter now, the anger giving way to something colder. "Do you think we enjoy building weapons that can glass entire planets? Do you think we take pride in knowing we're the only species in this room that has fought itself to the brink of extinction more than once and still survive?" She straightened. "We are the way we are because we had no choice. Because our world tried to kill us long before we ever reached the stars. And now we see the same patterns beyond our home world. The universe is not kind, it is not fair, it is not safe. And yet, you act as if war is some distant horror that only happens to less civilized species." She shook her head. "War doesn't care about your treaties. It doesn't care about your ideals. It happens whether you're ready or not." Another silence, longer this time. The weight of her words settled over them like a shroud. Finally, one of the council generals, a grizzled, battle-scarred Vakari warrior, spoke. "So what now?" His voice was low, resigned. "The Zeltyr are wounded, but they're not gone. They'll regroup. They'll return. What do we do?" Drake studied him for a long moment, then slowly she nodded. "Now," she said, "we prepare for the next war, and this time, you listen." No one argued. Because for the first time in their history, the Council finally understood what it meant to share a galaxy with Deathworlders. The chamber was silent as the representatives sat in their seats, their gazes fixed on the holographic displays that flickered before them. The wreckage of the once mighty Zeltyr fleet loomed large on the screens, a grave testament to the ferocity of humanity's intervention. The aftershocks of that intervention reverberated throughout the galaxy, and no species could deny the truth any longer. Deathworlders had saved them, and the galaxy was still trying to comprehend the enormity of it all. Admiral Helena Drake had delivered her harsh words, and now it seemed they were beginning to sink in. The Council's leadership had convened in secret once again. Behind closed doors, the debate was raging. The realization that the Zeltyr's destruction had been so decisive, so complete, left many of the galaxy's most powerful species in a state of profound confusion. Could they trust the humans? Could they accept their help going forward, knowing that it had come at the cost of their own pride and the shattered illusions of unity and peace they had so long cherished? Humanity had not only won the war, it had exposed the failures of the Council. The humans had done what no one else had been willing to do. While the Council was obsessed with diplomacy and peace treaties, humanity had built a war machine capable of crushing the most aggressive species the galaxy had ever known. The war was over. The Zeltyr had been beaten back, and Velsara Prime had been saved. But a greater question remained. What came next? The room was filled with the weight of that question as one by one the representatives began to speak, their voices a mixture of resentment, fear, and awe. "We cannot simply let them dictate terms," said Calthor, the leader of the Shrena, the galaxy's fiercest martial race. His voice was sharp, his brow furrowed with the tension of the moment. "They cannot just waltz in here and claim to be the saviors of the galaxy. We cannot allow this species to dictate the terms of our survival." "But they did," retorted Ilatha, the representative from the Haxta, her delicate antennae trembling with frustration. "Whether we like it or not, humanity showed us what true resolve looks like. They didn't ask for permission, they didn't ask for favors, they just acted. And in doing so, they secured what we could not. They destroyed the Zeltyr, who had long been considered the greatest threat to our collective safety." And there was a long silence after Ilatha's words, a silence that seemed to stretch on for far longer than it should have. The room was divided. Some were still resentful of humanity's boldness, while others were beginning to recognize the undeniable truth of their words. Humanity had saved them, and in doing so had forced them all to confront the uncomfortable reality of their own weaknesses. The Galactic Council had always prided itself on its unity, its capacity to maintain peace across the stars, and yet, as the last few days had shown, that unity had faltered when it mattered most. While the Council had been mired in politics and diplomacy, humanity had risen to the occasion. "We cannot ignore the implications of this," said a new voice. Zalcor, the elderly representative from the Ardell, a species known for their wisdom and tendency to speak bluntly. "Humanity has proven their strength. They have proven that their species is willing to do what others will not. I, for one, am not willing to risk what they've earned in the name of pride." The Ardell's words hung in the air and the room fell silent once again. Zalcor had a point. The humans were unpredictable, but they were also incredibly effective, and the galaxy had seen just how far that effectiveness could take them. It was then that General Tukor, the veteran leader of the Vakari military, spoke up. His deep voice resonated with authority, his tone calm but filled with the weight of experience. He was not one to mince words, and his presence alone commanded attention. "The Zeltyr will not rest," he said. They will come back, and when they do, we will not have the luxury of relying on human help. This cannot become a one-time alliance. We must adapt, we must evolve if we are to survive. The humans have shown us a glimpse of a future where survival is not guaranteed. They fight differently than we do. They think differently than we do. And we need to learn from that. The council chamber was suddenly filled with murmurs of agreement and dissent. Some still feared the humans and their unpredictable nature. Others were beginning to realize that, whether they liked it or not, the humans might be the galaxy's best hope for survival. But the question remained, would humanity continue to offer their help? And if so, under what terms? Admiral Drake had been clear. She had not fought for the Council, she had fought for Earth. She had fought because humanity had its own reasons for entering the war, not for some grand ideal or for the good of the galaxy, but because humanity understood, perhaps more clearly than anyone, that survival came at a cost, and humanity was willing to pay that cost. As the Council debated their next move, David Harker, the civilian representative from Earth, sat alone in a small observation room. His role was far from official. He was not a military strategist or a political leader, but he had seen what the humans had done. He had seen their strength, their resolve, and he knew that this was only the beginning. He had not been in the war room when the Zeltar had been defeated. He had not fought on the front lines, but he had felt the shockwaves of that victory from Earth. Humanity had won the war, but now came the harder part, the aftermath. What would it mean for Earth's future? Would the humans be dragged into the endless political games of the Council, expected to lend their strength in every conflict that arose? Or would they continue to stand apart, a singular, self-sufficient species that cared for nothing beyond their own survival? David could feel the tension in the air. The Council was divided. Humanity had proven itself to be an undeniable force, but that was only part of the equation. The next step was even more critical. How would humanity shape the future? The door to the observation room slid open, and in stepped a familiar face. Admiral Drake herself. Her posture was rigid, her expression unreadable. David stood and nodded to her. The Council is still reeling, I assume? Drake's lips tightened into a thin line. They don't know what to make of us. Some are grateful, others are not. David chuckled darkly. I'm sure some of them don't appreciate being reminded of their failures. It's more than that, Drake said, her voice heavy with frustration. Some of them are scared of what we've done, of what we might do next, and honestly, I'm not sure I blame them. David regarded her with a mixture of admiration and concern. You're not planning to become the galaxy's enforcer, are you? Drake met his gaze, her eyes hard. I don't know yet, but if we don't take control of this situation, if we don't force the galaxy to face the truth, then we'll just be another cog in a machine that's already broken. We've seen what happens when the Council fails. I won't let humanity fall into that trap. David nodded. He understood. The galaxy was a vast and complex place, and humanity had just made its mark in ways no one had ever anticipated. But the future was uncertain, and humanity was now walking a tightrope between dominance and destruction. If the galaxy wants to move forward, we have to lead, Drake continued. We can't afford to play their games anymore. We're not interested in diplomacy for the sake of diplomacy. We're not interested in keeping the peace if that peace means letting our enemies grow stronger. We're here because we understand the cost of survival. David's gaze shifted toward the stars beyond the observation window. And if the galaxy isn't ready for that? Drake's expression softened slightly, though there was no mistaking the steel in her words. Then we'll make them ready. The words hung in the air between them like a promise, and for the first time since humanity had intervened, David felt a flicker of hope that perhaps the galaxy could be saved, not by the soft touch of diplomacy, but by the unyielding will of those who refused to go down without a fight. The Deathworlders had arrived, and the galaxy would never be the same again.